Ассоциация наша была создана в 1977 году. Это в этой книге памяти описаны все годы создания.
Прибыли когда сюда первые мигранты, ветераны, и они друг друга видели и подумали о том, как бы объединиться, как бы создать такую группу. И она была создана. А вот решение создания ассоциации.
The West Hollywood as a city has been incorporated in 1984, and the Association of Veterans has been founded slightly before. Our veterans come here as early as 1970s and throughout the 1990s, and many of them come because their children migrate to Los Angeles.
And I served on the City Council for many years in the early days of West Hollywood, and the association was such an important part of our community, even though we've lost so many of the members. But it was really such a great group of people who advocated on behalf of the Russian-speaking community, really educated us about a lot of things that they had gone through, and just really a great group of heroes who I don't think we would have won World War II if it weren't for the people fighting on the Eastern Front. Some of the individuals actually worked on the campaign to make West Hollywood a city, and then some of the individuals were very involved in helping us reach the Russian-speaking community. We have people from all over Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union, and it was really important for us to be able to communicate and provide services and build that level of trust with the community.
You know, West Hollywood became a port of entry for the Russian Jewish community when they came to Southern California. Veterans of the Soviet Army were here. They took great pride in the role they played in beating the Nazis. West Hollywood became like Brighton Beach was in New York, in Brooklyn. And in the eastern half of the city of West Hollywood, if you drove down Santa Monica Boulevard, even to this day, you see some, but in those days, almost every store had Russian lettering, Cyrillic lettering on the stores. You know, chlieb, miasa. It was like being in the Soviet Union or in Russia in terms of the signage. The veterans were a part of the Russian community here. You know, the Russian community writ large was, you know, a constellation of young people, older people, people who were veterans of the World War II, people who were not veterans of World War II, were too young to be. But they brought an infusion of a culture.
Plummer Park is really at the heart of Russian community, the heart and soul of Russian-speaking migration in the city. But before we even talk about it, I want to say that Russian-speaking migration to the city was localized in 3 different places in Los Angeles. And at the turn of the century, there was a large Molokan colony in Boyle Heights. It was like a little Russian village with the actual peasants who looked for like Russian peasants in the middle of Boyle Heights, downtown Los Angeles. Then the second place where Russian community localized is Hollywood Russian colony, where the representatives of the white immigration came, of the second wave of migration, and again they rebuilt their community there. Right now this area is populated mainly by Hispanic people and some Thai people. And this is the third home and place for Russian immigration, and I have to say that even prior to mass migration from the Soviet Union, some Russians were already in Plummer Park, and for example in the 1960s there were many performances that took place here, and I've recently seen a wonderful collection of photographs taken during the Russian theater performances in Los Angeles, and the people who were in the audience totally belong to the different era, different migration. Then come 1970s, and this is where the all the migrants who came here in the 1920s and then later in the 1940s meet with the newcomers from the Soviet Union, and these two groups mix and they meet in the park, and from here a very new creative mix of culture is born.
Столярский стал президентом ассоциации в 1996 году. Но вот когда он пришел, ассоциация ожила, и люди стали приходить. Вот заседание комитета, вот парад. В нашей ассоциации был генерал Мазин. Вот он. Он нам очень здорово помогал. Приходил всегда, говорил, подсказывал. Главная цель нашей ассоциации была объединить, выявить ветеранам. Мы часто давали в газету объявления, по радио. Тогда еще было радио даже здесь. По радио говорили о том, чтобы приходили вот по адресу. И я ко многим даже домой ходила. Вот звонили, мы не можем прийти. И я к ним шла. Столярский очень такой неординарный человек, чисто военный, с военной выправкой. Слово у него всегда находится для каждого. И этим он завоевал уважение, что стал президентом. Он создал комитет у нас, в который вошло 11 человек. И каждый из них за что-то отвечал. За культмассовую работу, за помощь ветеранам, за помощь тем, которые уже не могли ходить.
27 лет тому назад моя семья прибыла в Америку. И сразу же, как ветеран войны, я узнал, что здесь существует ассоциация ветеранов Второй мировой войны. Я сразу поступил, включился в работу этой ассоциации. И все это время, все эти 27 лет, я очень много трудился в ассоциации и старался помочь всячески всем ветеранам. И главная моя цель была в том, чтобы объяснить людям, откуда мы приехали, куда мы приехали и что в мире происходит. Переоценить ценности. Ассоциация большую роль в жизни Вест-Холливуда сыграла. У нас были хорошие связи с ветеранами американскими. Особенно мэр Вест-Холливуда Джефф Прэнк. Он очень много сделал, чтобы помочь ассоциации. Мы сделали памятник в парке. Это с его помощью. Я считаю, что я не зря провел эти годы, и что ассоциация вошла в историю не только Второй мировой войны, но в историю города и Америки.
I met the leadership of the association when I first ran for city council in West Hollywood back in 1997. The veterans were very, very active in the city at that point. There were three people, Mr. Barkin, Mr. Stolarski, and Mr. Kutz. Stolarski was the president, and Kutz was the vice president who spoke good English, and he was kind of the liaison. But there was, at that time, there were, I recall a statistic that there were more veterans of the Soviet Army from World War II in West Hollywood than there were American veterans. It was a very large group that they served as, in many ways, as the ambassadors for the Russian-speaking community in West Hollywood to the government. And they were active, civically engaged, and kind people who really wanted to be involved and contribute to the community and to the welfare of their fellow veterans. And I was very impressed by this. You know, when you think of West Hollywood, it's a small, a very urban city. It's got a history for the Sunset Strip and rock and roll. You know, a third of the population is LGBTQ, which is really what the city's known for. But I discovered we had this incredibly rich history and culture of people who immigrated from what was then the Soviet Union, and that we had these veterans who fought during this war, who's in many cases they lost family and friends to the concentration camps, to the horrors of war, and you know they did nothing less than help save the world from the Nazis and destruction. And their time in service was a life-defining element for them. Their whole lives were defined by their service in that war. It was profoundly important to them, and it helped glue them together after they immigrated to the United States and found themselves in and around West Hollywood, and it became the foundation for their social interaction, for their civic involvement, and it was just really something, I thought, special and unique and terribly overlooked by the city. While the city was very involved in helping them in terms of affordable housing and senior services. When I ran for re-election in 2001, I was the mayor, and I sat down with the veterans many times, and they told me about their hopes and aspirations, and they had some goals that I thought were reasonable and achievable. One is they really wanted to have a monument to recognize their service in the service of democracy, fighting the Nazis. They wanted a monument at Plummer Park. They had an annual parade, and the city used to allow them to have a parade, but they used to make it require them to have it on a side street, in a residential side street. And they really thought it was important enough to have on Santa Monica Boulevard, like we do other parades. They had a library, a Russian language library that needed a home. It had been housed at the Chabad synagogue, but the location was only temporary. They needed a permanent home, and were hoping that the city could provide a location. They also wanted to share their culture and their story with the community. We're hoping that the city would help support them in an annual cultural festival, and so that was their agenda. And all of those things seem to be consistent with the city's the way the city interacted with other parts of the community, and they all seemed achievable. So I worked with them to help raise money to secure a site at Plummer Park to build this monument. And you've seen the monument. It's a beautiful, beautiful monument.
So we're standing in front of a monument dedicated to the veterans of World War II, which has been erected by the Association of Veterans in 2005 with a great help from the city of West Hollywood. These places of memory are very important for us, and they visually signify the presence of people here and commemorate the community. In a way, they serve as the markers of the public memory that exists and lives in the city. So as you see, the design of the monument reminds us very much of the monuments that we can see all across the Soviet Union, but I have to remark on the scale. It is much smaller, miniatures. So it's not quite that those monumental monuments that we're used to, but much smaller, intimate, homemade. And the poem by Rasul Gamzatov about the cranes flying is, of course, very, very famous and connotes so many meanings to us, because cranes are not only the birds that return each spring to the East Central European and Russian spaces and make homes there, but they're also migratory birds. So we can think about the cranes from Gamzatov's poems as representation of the migration that took place and all the veterans who are in the city.
Well, the city of West Hollywood financially, I think, supported them in some of their projects. The monument that exists at Plummer Park is a county park, is a West Hollywood park now. So they gave some of the real estate to for that purpose. Plummer Park became the open space headquarters of the Russian community. I mean, you could go there and see people playing chess in the morning all day long. Having picnics and coffee clutches. More Russian was spoken in Plummer Park than English. It was wonderful.
They were really instrumental, I think, in, number one, just commemorating the victory over Germany and the Nazis, and also calling attention to various atrocities that occurred. Many of the members were Jewish, and so they also called attention to the travesty of the Holocaust. And then, because they had a connection with City Hall and with West Hollywood, they were able to reach out to us and identify people in the community who needed services or needed attention. People would fight over how the parade should be and who should get credit, and there were always those kind of struggles as well. And then there were oftentimes a dinner or a luncheon to honor people. And I was always surprised at how much people could eat and drink. And here would be these like 95-year-olds having, vodka and then, eating and eating and eating. And I'm like, I couldn't make it past the salad. So it was fun because, they just had such a great love of life.
And there was a soft spot in all of our hearts about the veterans of the war. I mean, this was a if the war had ended differently, the world would be a different place. And so these people, these men mostly, some women too, who risked everything to defeat fascism. It's hard to learn a new language. You uproot yourself from a country where you know the language, you know the culture, you know the system of how the economic system, such as it is, and you come to a totally new place. You have to reinvent yourself, and the older you are, the harder it is. However, in West Hollywood, there was a community of people who had that in common. And because they were able to socialize together and recreate together and go to each other's birthdays and speak their language, I mean, it became a little bit of Russia right here in West Hollywood, right? So you had stores and where all the signs and all the prices were in Russian. You had store owners who spoke Russian. Compared to what these veterans went through during World War II, immigrating to West Hollywood was a walk in the park.
To understand the activity of veterans during the time, you have to really look at the booklets that they published, because I saw those booklets in the early 2000s, and it was in that Belarusian apartment block where people showed it to me saying, well, we already have our own press and our own publications, and even nowadays we know how difficult it is to do with all the technology that we have, with all the publishing opportunities, and doing this in early 2000s was nothing short of a feat. So we are in front of the monument to the victims of Babi Yar, which was installed by the Russian-speaking community of West Hollywood in 1991. 1991 was a very important year for this community because many of them came from the Soviet Union, and the country collapsed while they were here waiting for their documents. Many of them started coming right after the collapse, and that was the time of the global tectonic shifts when people were not quite sure what the future holds. The fact that this monument is to the victims of Babi Yar is very important and telling, because we know that this tragedy happened in Kiev and Soviet Ukraine, and many people who came to West Hollywood come from the territory of the former Soviet Ukraine and contemporary Ukraine. It's very important to emphasize that this is all the work of the Association of Veterans, and the two monuments that exist in the park is a living, continuing legacy of who they are or were in their work. And if you are to think about it, of course, it's very difficult to erect a monument. So it took a lot of coordination. And one more thing that I would like to emphasize is that a lot of that happened because the authorities of West Hollywood, the mayor at the time, understood the importance of it.
They were always kind enough to invite me to all of their annual celebrations. And that annual May 9th celebration was so important to them. Now in their 90s, they just weren't able to have the parade on Santa Monica Boulevard. They weren't able to coordinate the annual festival, but it was still important to them. So we had the city more or less become the organizer of that festival every year. So we were able to bring in entertainment and the tents and the chairs and the loudspeakers, everything necessary to make certain that we could have a dignified celebration to recognize this date, which was so important in their lives. And the city is still doing it today. And even though today there's only a handful of veterans left. Most of them are not able to get around. It became such an important and defining event in the city of West Hollywood, and I hope that the city continues to do it and to recognize this important part of our history.
Когда я пришла, тогда было 1400 человек. Тогда. А вот в этой книге памяти тоже есть список этих 1400. И они начали постепенно уходить. В одном году ушли Столярский, 2 вице-президента, Куц, Ефим, они все ушли в 2017 году. Вот это нынешний президент наш, Борис Миломед. Я перекличку делаю, я каждый год звоню им, перезваниваю, уточняю, живы-здоровы, кто как. В этот Новый год я стала звонить к ним. У меня список остался последний на 58 человек. И так у нас осталось сейчас 9 человек, и другие не пополняются. Мы писали в газету часто приглашали, приходите, приходите. Сейчас наша ассоциация закрыта. Ключи у меня. Книга у меня.
Ассоциация – это моя семья, как и многих других ветеранов, естественно. Мы чувствовали себе плечо друг друга, мы понимали друг друга, мы помогали друг другу. Это была действительно замечательная, дружная, фронтовая семья. К сожалению, большинства нет. Я вспоминаю о своих друзьях, не только тех, кто на фронте со мной был и погиб, и тех, кто здесь прожил вместе со мной в этой замечательной стране, которую я полюбил всей душой.